Good morning and welcome to Destination Happy. Today's destination brings us to getting a car barred in the state of California. Now, as some of you may or may not know, getting a car barred in California is the process of getting a car, an engine swap, certified in the state of California, so it is smog legal and you can get it smogged at any regular smog shop in the state. Basically, it's a process that quite a few people have heard about, not a lot of people are too familiar with, and a lot of it currently is a lot of hearsay, rumors, and old information. As far as I know, I don't know of anybody who's done it in relatively recent time. I know a few people who've done it in maybe more than a few years back, so some things have changed in the most recent time. So I wanted to go ahead and do this process, not just to make my car legal, but also to share the process with everyone, so that way they can have an updated record of what is currently required, what needs to be done, and how to get it done. And hopefully this can be a resource for you, and of course I would try to make myself available to answer as much questions as I can. But the process overall actually wasn't too bad, and was not, I can't say relatively painless, but it wasn't as difficult overall as some would make you believe. So I'd like to share that with you. So basically, my car is a 1991 Honda Civic Si, and at the time I had a 1996 JDM Type R swap. Now, this swap, you cannot get certified for bar in the state of California. Basically, for the 96 model and up, you would have had to have the entire evap system updated in the car, which apparently is a lot of tedious work, which a lot of shops don't want to do or charge a lot for. The shop that did my original swap wanted to charge an additional $4,000 just for the evap work. So that wasn't going to happen. On top of that, you also need to do a diagnostic port, because 96 and up is now OBD2, and you need the diagnostic port. So those are some issues there. So typically when you do an engine swap in these EFs, you want to do an OBD1 system, moving up from the original OBD0 system. So that's where we're starting. So what I had to do was basically figure out how I can get my car barred. Now, I had a friend who used to be a bar ref, and another friend who had done a swap similar in my car. And from the information I was told, I basically needed to get my hands on a USDM GSR swap and bar it under that. So that was my first part. So I was able to find one, and luckily that engine had been gone over top to bottom. Seals, plugs, timing, belt, everything. Tip-top tune from top to bottom. Everything had been gone over, so it was in the best running condition of its life. That engine was going to go into my car with my Type R transmission, and my Type R was going to come out and get set aside for a little bit. We'll come back to that later. Now, with my car, I was running a Rywire mil-spec DNB tucked engine harness. Okay, so with that engine harness, I have an OBD1 ECU plug with OBD2 injectors, alternators, and distributor. Okay, and that's totally fine. BAR doesn't care if you're using OBD2 injector, alternator, distributor. They don't care about that. The harness, totally fine as well. They just don't want you to use jumpers, they don't want hacked wiring, they don't want butt connectors and splices all over the place. So the Rywire harness was totally fine for my intents and purposes. The GSR swap dropped in perfectly, not a problem. We did the typical skunk 2 manifold to get rid of the GSR manifold and the secondary butterfly, which most of the aftermarket harnesses bypass anyways, and we're more or less good to go. Now, the only thing is, with the Rywire harnesses and most aftermarket harnesses, you have to be aware is my car runs an AC. Most of those harnesses don't have a provision for AC at all. They also don't have provision for cell, and we'll come back to that as well. So both of those things not included in a Rywire harness. If you're working off of your OEM harnesses, then that shouldn't be too much of a problem for you. But so we dropped in the engine, we had the OBD2 accessories, injectors, distributor, and alternator, OBD1 ECU plug. Had to make sure that we had the right ECU for the right engine. 94 ECU 94 GSR. So that was fun. Well, when my typewriter was in there, my friend Boots, who's just a wiring wizard, had helped me wire up my AC into that harness. And admittedly, he even admitted it wasn't the greatest of wiring job because we were just trying to get it functional. We weren't looking for pretty, we were just trying to get it functional. But knowing that I would be going back to BAR to get it certified, we wanted to make sure that the wiring was cleaned up and that it was as clean as possible. So when I got the car back after dropping off the GSR, the intention was to take it to him and have that AC wiring cleaned up. But my mechanic friend who dropped in the engine also mentioned, hey, by the way, your harness has no provision for a cell, check engine light. Had no idea about that. So if you didn't know, on OBD-O cars, when you, on the EF Civic and CRX, there's a little blue plug in the passenger footwell, and you typically jump that when you're setting your timing at the distributor, but you also jump that plug when you're reading the trouble codes on your ECU. You'll typically pull the cover off of the ECU and you'll read the flashing lights on the ECU itself when you jump that plug. Well, on the OBD1 setup, once you have it wired in, when you jump that plug, you'll read the codes by the flashing check engine light on your dash. With the Rywire harness, it doesn't have that provision wired in, so you have to pin it and ground it and wire it yourself. Otherwise, you'll have no cell. And that's important because for the BAR process, you have to make sure you have a working cell. If you don't have a working cell, that's going to be a fail. And they're going to ask you about that. So if it's not working, if you bypassed it, if you've cut it out, if you've taken out the bulb, that's an instant fail. So don't even try. Basically, we went ahead, he wired that up, got the cell working, got the AC working, everything was looking nice, but we didn't bundle up all the wires just yet, just in case. And all of a sudden I got a VSS engine code. And it was for the vehicle speed sensor. Couldn't figure out what it was. It did go away when we reset the ECU, but it kept popping up intermittently after small drives, and it wouldn't let me go into VTEC. But we figured it was a minor enough issue that we should be able to figure it out. And so, and it only came up at over certain speeds, so we thought, okay, as long as it didn't come up at speeds for the rollers, and it was only affecting VTEC, that I should be able to go ahead and do my phone appointment. So went ahead and set my phone appointment. And basically you call the BAR ref phone number, and that is, and I'll put the number here, it's 1-800-622-7733, and they'll ask you if you need to make an appointment, and if you need to schedule an appointment for an engine swap, etc. And so you select the options and you set a date and time. And they tell you they're going to give you a call from a blocked number. Okay. Now, you need to make sure that if your phone is set to block spam calls and things like that, that you take off that spam blocker. Because if you miss your call, you can screw yourself up because they'll mark it as a non-compliant call and it can mess up your progress. So you want to make sure that you have that set. I freaked out because my phone blocks all sorts of calls for stupid reasons. It doesn't even send it to my voicemail. It just blocks it and I don't know. So I was kind of freaked out and I was worried. I had my alarm set like a half hour early for the call. My guy actually called me half an hour late. But I was just so worried about the phone call and making sure I got the call that I didn't even worry about that. But they ended up calling me, made it through, and we went through the call. And before the call, they'll send you a list. And basically, the email that they'll send you will have a list of the required items that you need to have for the phone call for a 95 and older swap, a 96 to 99 swap, and a 2000 and newer swap. Okay? And you're going to have that list before the phone call, and you need to make sure that you have all that information before the phone call. So on the date of the phone call, he calls me up, and I have all this information with me. And so we start going over the information, and discussing all the details with the ref. What I'm doing, what kind of car it is, what kind of swaps going in, etc. And so he tells me, okay, so you have everything, it's the right ECU, right engine, all that. So he tells me, okay, we're going to need you to send pictures of the ECU, the ECU number. Do you have the VIN? So, no, I don't have the VIN. He's like, okay, that's fine. Do you have aftermarket parts, header, intake, etc.? I said, yes, I have a header and I have an intake manifold. He goes, okay, you need to make sure that you have pictures of the intake manifold and the carb number, the header, and that carb number. He wants pictures of the engine installed from the front, left, and right. They also want to make sure that you send them pictures of the cell working. He asked, does it turn on when you turn on the car? And all that means is, when you turn on the engine, how the cell kind of flashes for a second and then turns off. That just means that the cell is hooked up and it's working. Again, you didn't pull a bulb, cut a wire, etc. They'll also ask you about the catalytic. Did you use an OEM, aftermarket, etc.? They're going to want pictures of the number on the catalytic, so make sure to have that. And for the catalytic, that was one thing I had to do when I was doing all this. I bought an aftermarket California compliant catalytic from Magnaflow. When I went to the website, I did screen prints of all the information showing that it was California compliant, that it was for the 94 GSR, and the number and everything. When the cat came in, I took pictures of the number and markings on it before we installed it. Okay? And I had those pictures ready to go to the guy. But he mentioned that he also needed pictures of it installed showing the O2 sensor going into the catalytic. So that day I also had to jack up the car and make sure I took pictures clearly of the catalytic installed into the car with the O2 sensor going into it. So you're going to take all of those pictures and you're going to put them all together and you're going to send them off to the rep. And I took pictures of the dash with the cell light on and off. Now, one thing also to keep in mind with all of this is with my Type R, I had a combination of intakes. I had a AEM hybrid to a silicone coupler to an EF9 SIR airbox. Okay, that combination you can't use. It will fail. There's no carb number for it, and it's all mixed match parts. You can't use that. It has to be a carb legal setup, or it has to be OEM. The problem is when you use a Skunk 2 intake manifold, there is no carb legal intake intake for the GSR using a Skunk 2 manifold that's California carb compliant. None. All the California carb compliant intakes use the original GSR intake manifold. So what I did was I used a B18B intake tube to the EF9 SIR intake airbox. It was all OEM. That worked. And then make sure to use the hose from the valve cover to the intake tube. Don't bypass that. You have to use it. Don't use a little breather or anything like that. And so that was all OEM. They didn't care that it's mixed match as far as that goes because it was all OEM parts. So there's no problem there. But you have to make sure it's either OEM or it has to have a carb yield number on it. So I had a DC header that had a carb number, and I had the sticker on the radiator support. The intake Skunk 2 intake manifold, that's acceptable. You have to have the card number for that as well. So those were fine. The Rye-wire harness, that was fine too. Again, I was using the Rye-wire harness with an OBD1 ECU plug and OBD2 injector alternator distributor plugs. That was all fine. So I sent them all those pictures, sent it off to the ref. I think by the following Monday, I got an email back and they said, congratulations, now you can schedule your physical appointment. So, yay. And I called them back to make sure what kind of time frame, how soon do I need to get that physical appointment done? Because on my car, I had paid my registration fees, but I still hadn't gotten my smog for the year. So I was kind of worried. And they said, as long as your fees are paid and you've already gotten the approval to make your appointment, you're not on a specific deadline. You can take however long you need to get it done. Now, obviously, use that with a grain of salt. You don't want to stretch it out for too long, but at least I knew I didn't have to get it done in a week, 2 weeks, etc. And remember, I still had to deal with that VSS check engine light. So now that I got that first appointment squared away, now I had to dig in and worry about that VSS check engine light. So I started digging around and, put out the call. Did anybody have a cluster I could borrow? We borrowed the electronic speed sensor from my EG. We plugged it into the Rye-wire harness, and the ECU wasn't reading the electronic VSS. And we don't know if it was a Rye-wire issue or a wiring issue or what, but it wasn't liking that. We tried swapping out different ECUs. I tried a chipped ECU, another stock ECU. I tried even a ECU from an OBD1 HX that I had, just so we can see, what codes were coming up and stuff, and it just didn't like certain ECUs, and a lot of them it just kept agreeing VSS, VSS, VSS. So at least it was consistent. I was even talking to Simon over at Nomis Industries, and he gave me some insight, and he was saying, unfortunately, those old cable clusters, because they're older and stuff, there's not a lot of diagnostics you can do. It's one of those things. He hasn't gotten a chance to test a lot of those either, so it could have been a number of things. There's a module on the back of them that translates the physical cable movement to electronic signal to the ECU. That could have burned out. So I was just having issues, and it wouldn't go away. I tried taking off the module, tried running it without. Luckily, 91 Civic hatchback was able to loan me a standard cluster, and that worked. Made the VSS code go away. So at least I knew if I needed to, I could do the physical test with his cluster, and I'll just bring my other one to show the physical miles. But I still wanted to make sure I had something that worked properly. So we still kept digging around. Like I said, we tried different ECUs, chipped, non-chipped, OEM. I tried my old Type R ECU. Nothing was working. Finally, Boots found another SI cluster that his brother had, gave me that, but unfortunately the speedo was busted. My ECU didn't like it at first, and so I tried different combinations. I took the module from his, put it on mine, didn't like that. Took my speedo, put it in his with that module, didn't like that. So I tried different combinations, and then finally I was able to fix the speedo in his, left the module on his, and it liked the combination. And his miles weren't that far off from mine, but it finally worked. The ECU was happy, everything was happy. So now I was finally ready, and VTech was kicking, so now I was ready to do my physical appointment. And so here I'll insert what happened for my first appointment. And so as you saw in that video, we went, did my first test, everything looked real good. They were impressed by my car, all the wiring, everything looked good. I thought everything was going good, but my car was too damn low for the rollers. Their roller setup is in the floor. So when they dropped the platform to do the smog test, my header and my oil pan contacted the steel plate between the right and left rollers, and they couldn't do the test. Now, when we left, I asked them, did everything else look good? They said, yeah. So I thought, okay, once I raise it up, all I need to do is the smog test. So when I got the chance, I went ahead and maxed out the front end on the ground controls. And then I figured, you know what, just to be extra safe, I'm going to put my tallest wheel and tire combo on there, which was my set of Panasports, 16x7 on 205 45/16s, and they had brand new tires. So threw those onto the EF, and it went from basically 22 and a quarter height from ground to fender to 24 and a half from ground to fender. So I figured, okay, that's good, and pretty happy with it. The next day I went out to the car, and my wife noticed, why were both of the tires on the driver's side flat?
Oh, come on!
It's like, what the hell? Pulled the two wheels off, took it back to the tire shop. I thought it was the valve stems went bad. Nope. Turned out both of them had some old crack repairs that I had done a long time ago that both opened back up and aired them both out. So I was like, damn, what the hell? And that weekend coming up was the ELDS over at Benelli Park. So, and all this time I was kind of keeping all this work I was doing under wraps. That's why a lot of people were asking like where my car was and stuff, and about my cracked subframe and everything. All of this I was doing kind of behind closed doors and under the radar and everything like that. So that's why I was using my EG a lot. So I didn't really want to raise any eyebrows, and especially since I had the GSR in there, I couldn't really pop my hood because people would notice it wasn't the Type R anymore. So I threw the TEs on there, and I was hoping that the TEs would be closer in rolling diameter to the Panasports because they were definitely bigger than the MR5s. But it wasn't a big enough difference going from the MR5s to the TEs. So I was still a little concerned. But I ended up rolling the TEs to the Enjoy Life Drive Slow event on Sunday. Great event. That was fun seeing the guys. And so on Monday, I ended up taking the two good Panasports and threw them up back on the front of the car to gain whatever height I could. And luckily I did, because by doing that, I had 1.5 inch of clearance between me and that pan this time.
Ask any racer, any real racer. It don't matter if you win by an inch or a mile. Winning's winning.
And so that made a huge difference in me being able to get the test or not being able to get the test. And this time, they threw it on the rollers, and like I said, I thought that was it. It was just going to be do the smog test, and, you know, that'll be it. But no, it was taking a long time, so I was getting kind of nervous. After the rollers, they had the car still there, they were poking around under the hood, and, you know, remember, as you saw in the other video, the guy had told me, I can't record anything from them inspecting on the hood. I had to stay behind, out of the shop, and could record only at a distance. At this point, I saw them jack up the car, looking underneath, probably checking the catalytic cat number and all that, making sure everything's as it was presented by me in my pictures. So they were checking all that. They were looking at the wiring and everything. And they tell you in the appointment, budget about 100 minutes. And it really was about 100 minutes. They were really taking their time going over everything. And it was stressful. It was pretty stressful. Because even though I knew that the car was running clean and strong, and I even took it to a smog shop to do a pre-test just to make sure it was running extra clean, I was nervous, you know? I wasn't sure if it, you know, was something little stupid could send me back to come back for another test date. All of a sudden, they came back, you passed. Awesome, good news, it passed, awesome. And so, all of a sudden, you know, like, oh, where do you want your sticker? I put the sticker there, and I was just over the moon. And then so, you know, I did my little interview with the ref after, asked them the questions you saw. So they were able to confirm you can't bar JDM engines, period. You can use them as functional replacements, but you cannot bar them. So you can bar a USDM engine, and a JDM can only be used as a functional. So that's their use. So basically, if you have a car with a US GSR engine, and you blow that engine, you can technically use a JDM Type R as a functional replacement. It has to be hooked up the same way as your GSR, though, for all intents and purposes, at smog time or for smog purposes, has to be hooked up the same way. Okay? That makes it a functional replacement. If you have an EM1, technically you can use a CTR engine as a functional replacement as long as it's hooked up the same way as your outgoing B16 for smog purposes. Again, there's a little bit of gray area. I'll let you guys kind of figure that out on your own. You can ask me questions in the comments, or if you guys want to ask me in person. Obviously, I probably can't go too deep in the video here. More or less, if you have like an Acura with a 1.8, most Acura 1.8s are considered a functional replacement, as long as they're hooked up the same way as the outgoing engine, the ECU, smog devices, all that stuff. And you would not need to bar them. The barring is when you're doing an engine change. If you're just doing an engine replacement, as long as it is the functional replacement, you're fine. So it kind of goes back in the day, some of you guys may remember, for the single overhead cam engines, the D16A6s, when those blew, there was a shop down in downtown called Watanabe Corp, and you can buy the JDM replacements. Those were actually slightly hotter cams, slightly better compression, but those were direct replacements. When you blew these, you just drop them in, boom. You didn't have to bar, you didn't have to do anything. And you could smog them because everything was hooked up exactly the same. That's basically the same idea. So, JDM engines, good for functional replacement, but you cannot bar. Okay? USDM, good for bar, fine for functional replacement. If it's a functional replacement, you do not need to bar. Okay? You do not need to bar it if it's a functional replacement. Okay, so hopefully that helps everybody. Again, drop some comments in below. Let me know if you guys have questions. I'll try and get them answered to you as soon as possible. Happy to help anybody that's looking for help and try to get through this process. Like I said, I had some pitfalls and stuff, but overall the process actually wasn't that bad. It was pretty good. It was a learning experience, and you know, the main thing is, remember, just make sure before you do this, make sure your engine's tuned. Make sure it's, you know, maintenance is all done. Make sure the RF mentioned, when you go, they even look at your oil Okay, they'll pull your dipstick and check your oil. If you don't have oil showing on your dipstick, that can also be a fail. So make sure you top off the oil, check your plugs, check your maintenance, check your timing, all that stuff. Do all the basic stuff first and foremost, so that way you make sure everything's running tip-top the way it's supposed to be. Don't waste their time, don't waste yours. Make sure to do all of that, and you should be able to get through the process. Don't half-ass it, and don't try to get stuff through that you know will not get through. Don't try to just say, oh, this is this. When they do that test, they don't even talk to you through the entire test. They go and do their stuff. So you can't stand there and tell them, oh, this is this from this, or this is that from that. No. They will go and check all that information. They're not going to ask you. So don't try to pull anything over on them. They will check. So, okay, well, thank you again for joining me. Again, hopefully this will help you out there, and hopefully this will get some more cars barred, and help some more people figure out what they're doing with their JDM engine or their US engine. Thank you very much. Have a great day.